Faith isn't loud, it's a quiet yes in the middle of uncertainty. Fog doesn't ask permission to settle over the fields. It simply arrives, soft, uninvited, thick with a kind of hush that changes how you move through familiar ground. You can't see the horizon. Even the road you traveled yesterday looks strange. And in that gray, clouded space, you slow down. Not because you've lost direction, but because your vision has. That's what waiting on God can feel like. You haven't forgotten where you were going. You just can't see how to get there. But maybe that's where trust begins. Not in the clarity, but in the dimness. Not when everything makes sense, but when it doesn't. And still you show up. Still you keep walking. Because something deep in you believes that just because the light is hidden doesn't mean the way is gone. This is not the moment to turn back. This is the moment to trust that God is not stalling your life. He is sustaining it. His silence is not absence. His delay is not denial. And what looks like a standstill could be the sacred beginning of a deeper transformation. Because faith is never about what you can predict. It's about who you believe is walking with you, especially when your plans unravel. So breathe again. And lean in, not to your need for control, but to the one who never needed your roadmap to begin with. Let's step into this journey with renewed courage, because God isn't done. He's just drawing the way with invisible ink, and trust is what reveals it. When you feel stuck, you're still being led. Stillness can feel like a punishment when you're used to progress. Like being frozen in place while the rest of the world rushes by. You see others moving forward, new jobs, answered prayers, breakthroughs, blessings, while you're left staring at the same four walls, wondering if God misplaced your file. But here's what no one tells you often enough. Being stuck is not the same as being forgotten, and waiting is not wasted when it's in the hands of a faithful God. It's in these hidden, motionless seasons that something much deeper than success is being formed. Something eternal, something unshakable. John Ortberg once wrote, "God is not in a hurry. You are. That's why you're tired. God is working." The beauty and the burden of faith is that it doesn't run on your timeline. The pace of heaven often moves much slower than your desire for progress, but it's wiser, it's deeper, and it's always working on more than you can see. When you feel like nothing is happening, something still is. Stillness can be strategic in the kingdom of God. Sometimes God pauses the external so He can repair the internal. While you're begging for a breakthrough, He may be building a deeper root system so that when you finally rise, you won't topple under the weight of what you've prayed for. The psalmist says it best in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be strong, not be productive, be still. And in that stillness, come to know, not just with your head, but with your heart, that God is God, even when you are standing still, especially then. You may not be advancing in the way you expected, but you are being led in the way God sees fit. That difference matters. There's something sacred about slowing down. It strips away distractions. It reveals motives. It clears the fog of comparison. It invites you to let go of everything you thought your life should look like and start paying attention to what God is actually doing right where you are. You're not standing still because your faith failed. You're being positioned quietly, intentionally, so that when God does move, you'll be aligned and ready. Let that truth carry you today. Let it soften the frustration. Let it loosen the tension in your chest when your prayers don't turn into instant results. Because if God is letting you wait, He is also walking with you through the waiting. Faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the choice to keep trusting through them. Reverend Charles Stanley once said, What God brings you to, He will bring you through. That simple sentence has anchored countless hearts in storms of confusion, doubt, and delay. It's not a magical promise of ease, but it is a reassurance that God doesn't drop His children in the middle of the desert and walk away. He leads, even when the leading feels invisible. Maybe that's why Scripture constantly points us back to the wilderness, not as a place of failure, but a formation. The Israelites weren't wandering aimlessly. They were being led by cloud and fire, slowly, painfully, yes, but divinely. Every step had purpose, every stop had meaning, and every delay was God preparing something they weren't yet ready to handle. So if you feel stuck today, perhaps the more honest word is this: you're being sanctified. You're in a moment that feels unclear because clarity is not the point right now. Trust is. And trust grows best in places where your control fails. You may not see the whole picture, but you are being painted into something bigger than your current view. Sometimes it's mercy that clouds the path. Because if you saw the full picture too soon, you might run ahead before the foundation is ready. There is dignity in this chapter, even if it doesn't feel like one. You're not in a holding cell, you're in holy company. God is not just leading you somewhere. He is leading you into someone, into a stronger, quieter, deeper version of you that knows how to wait with wisdom and move with courage. But what do you do while you wait? You practice stillness with intention. You replace self-blame with gentleness. You stop measuring your worth by visible momentum, and you let your heart begin to trust that maybe this season isn't a mistake, it's a mercy. Here's the tension we live in. We want resolution, but God often gives revelation first. The answers may not come, but something better will. Awareness, clarity, intimacy with the one who sees the end from the beginning. And that kind of awareness builds something in you that success never could. A heart that knows how to walk by faith, not by sight. You were never meant to sprint through life at the pace of your fears. You were made to move at the pace of grace. And grace is never in a hurry. Think of this moment, this strange, stuck feeling moment, not as a punishment, but as a pruning. Not as a dead end, but as an invitation to trust differently, more deeply, more honestly, without conditions. This isn't about pretending things are okay. It's about anchoring yourself in the truth that even if they're not, God still is. He is not asking for a polished version of you. He is asking for your presence. And when you show up, tired, frustrated, confused, unsure, but still willing to place your faith in Him, that is worship. Not the kind that gets applause, the kind that heaven honors in silence. You may feel stuck, but heaven calls you faithful. You may feel delayed, but heaven sees you devoted. And maybe that's all that matters right now. This is not your final chapter, but it is an important one. Don't rush it. Let it teach you what fast seasons never could. Let it shape your voice, your values, your view of God. Because one day, you'll look back on this slow stretch and realize it wasn't just a delay, it was direction. He was guiding you all along. Trust isn't passive. It's the strongest step forward. It takes more strength to trust than to fight. In a world that praises hustle, control, and having a 5-step plan for every part of your life, trust can seem too soft, too abstract, even a little weak. But trusting God isn't passive. It's not a lack of ambition. It's not closing your eyes to reality and hoping something magical happens. Trust is choosing to stand firm on something deeper than your circumstances. It's placing your weight, your hope, your next step, your fragile heart on the character of someone you cannot see and believing He is steady even when the ground beneath you is not. That's not weakness. That's spiritual courage. And it may be the bravest thing you do this year. Charles Spurgeon put it this way: to trust God in the light is nothing, but to trust Him in the dark, that is faith. It's one thing to believe when the path is clear and lined with confirmation, but the moment clarity disappears and all you have left is a whisper, that's when trust becomes powerful. Not a default, not a fallback, but a choice that requires everything in you. Too often, trust is misunderstood. People imagine it means doing nothing, just sitting back and waiting. But genuine trust moves. It acts not in reckless independence, but in humble alignment. When you trust God, you don't wait on the sidelines. You keep showing up. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. Not because you're sure of the outcome, but because you're sure of the one who holds it. And that shift changes everything. You may still feel uncertainty. You may still wrestle with fear. But instead of letting those feelings steer the wheel, you let them ride in the back seat while trust keeps you walking forward. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says it so simply, "For we live by faith, not by sight." That verse isn't poetic fluff. It's a radical reorientation. It means your direction in life doesn't come from what you see, but from who you believe in. When your natural sight says, "This is impossible," faith says, "God is still able." When your logic screams, "There's no way through," trust whispers, "Keep going. The path is being made." That is not passivity. That is holy defiance. Because real trust challenges the fear that says you're stuck forever. It interrupts the anxiety that says you have to fix this right now. It silences the shame that says you should have figured this out already. Trust says God is not finished, and so neither are you. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. Not a perfect record, but a persistent return to belief again and again. Even on the days when your prayers sound more like questions than praise, even when you show up in silence because you have no new words, even when you don't feel strong, but you choose to keep walking anyway. Dorothy. Bernard once said, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." That kind of courage doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to have everything sorted. It just needs to keep saying yes, to show up when it's hard, to remain rooted when nothing feels secure, to move forward with the faith that obedience matters more than outcomes. There's something sacred about deciding to keep trusting God even when the metrics don't change. You might still be waiting for the job, the breakthrough, the reconciliation, the answer to a prayer that feels like it's gone unheard. And it would be so easy to disengage, to let cynicism take the place of wonder, to stop praying altogether, to give in to that quiet resignation that says, "What's the point?" But that's where trust finds its sharpest edge. It calls you to keep showing up anyway. Not because you're pretending everything is okay, but because you believe in a God who honors the unseen steps, the unnoticed obedience, the small daily choices that no one else applauds. This is where your character is formed, not in the moments of big applause, but in the long, slow silence of trust. There are parts of your story that will only grow in this kind of soil. When you water your faith with consistency, not emotion. When you pray even without goosebumps. When you choose to speak life over your situation, even when your situation looks lifeless. This is what builds resilience, not hype, but habit. Not high moments, but daily moments. And every time you choose trust, you are saying something powerful, that God is worthy of your confidence, not just when things are going well, but even when the future looks like a question mark. You are declaring that your faith is rooted in who He is, not in how fast He moves on your behalf. Think about that. Because if your trust only works when the outcome matches your preference, it's not trust, it's control in disguise. But when your heart can say, even if I don't get what I want, I will still trust you, something unshakable gets formed in you. God never promised that faith would always feel good, but He did promise that He would be faithful. And when your trust is built on that promise, you stop needing constant signs. You stop chasing after proof. You start walking with peace, even if the pieces haven't come together yet. There's a different kind of strength that rises in you when you stop trying to map the whole road and instead ask for enough light to take just the next step. Psalm 119:105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Notice, it's not a spotlight that shows you miles ahead, it's a lamp. Just enough to see what's right in front of you. That's how God leads, intimately, closely, with just enough for today. That's all you need. And that's all trust ever really asks of you, to let go of the obsession with outcomes, to stop measuring your life by public wins, to stop performing faith like a show and instead live it like a steady drumbeat. You don't have to feel like a warrior to be walking in victory. Trust isn't about emotion. It's about endurance. It's about showing up faithfully, even when your heart is still aching, even when doubt tries to wrap its fingers around your hope. If you keep choosing God in those moments, you are not weak. You are fiercely faithful. It may not feel like it. The world may not recognize it, but heaven does. And heaven always honors faith. So what does that look like practically? It may mean starting your day with a whispered prayer, not because you feel inspired, but because you know who you're anchoring your spirit to. It may mean turning off the noise and choosing 5 minutes of quiet to realign your heart. It may mean speaking aloud the promises of God, even when your reality contradicts them, because you're not confessing facts, you're declaring faith. These small, sacred decisions are not irrelevant. They are bricks in the foundation of a resilient life. God isn't asking you to have all the answers. He's asking you to keep coming to Him with the questions. He's not asking you to never waver. He's asking you to come back when you do. That's the grace of it all. Trust isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by your willingness to return. And every time you return, you're choosing hope over fear, faith over doubt, surrender over control. This is what makes trust so powerful. It survives the silence. It outlasts the disappointment. It remains even when your heart is worn thin. Because trust isn't built in the presence of instant results. It's built in the long, holy wait. And God does His best work in the waiting. If all He asked of you was belief when everything was clear, then faith would never deepen. But because He sometimes leads through the fog, you learn to listen. You learn to lean. You learn to walk, not by what you see, but by what you know of His heart. Let that be your strength today. You don't have to strive to make something happen. You are invited to trust the one who already sees how it ends and is guiding you there with patience and purpose. So no matter how uncertain this season feels, no matter how long the prayers have gone unanswered, know this: you're not stuck because you lack direction. You're being invited into deeper dependence. You're not behind because of what you haven't accomplished. You're right on time for what God is forming in you. And you're not too late for the promise He's spoken, because His timing is not rushed by your fear. What if this very moment, the one that feels slow and heavy and unremarkable, is where your greatest strength is being shaped? What if the choice to trust quietly, consistently, without spotlight or applause is the most powerful thing you could do today? And what if that choice is what heaven celebrates most? Don't wait to feel ready. Just begin again. Say yes again. Place your trust, not in what you see, not in what you fear, but in the one who's been faithful every step of the way. The same God who held you yesterday still holds you now, and He's not letting go. His silence doesn't mean his absence. Stillness can be unsettling when you're desperate for an answer. You pray, you listen, you wait, and the sky doesn't respond. No sign, no voice, just space, just quiet. And it feels personal, even when you know logically it's not. But what if the stillness isn't empty? What if it's sacred? What if the very thing you're interpreting as divine distance is actually an invitation to hear him differently? Leonard Cohen once wrote, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." It's an idea that sounds poetic until you're the one staring at the crack, wondering why the healing hasn't arrived yet, why the clarity hasn't broken through, why the prayers you whispered with all your heart are still sitting unanswered like unopened letters, and yet the scriptures remain steadfast. Hebrews 13:5 anchors the truth with quiet authority. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." That promise doesn't depend on your perception. It doesn't falter when your emotions do. It simply stands, unmoved, unshaken, eternal. Which means this: even when you feel abandoned, you're not. Even when God is silent, he's still near. That truth isn't always easy to hold. Silence has a way of stirring up doubt, especially when it lingers. We assume if God isn't speaking, he must not be paying attention. We wonder if something's wrong with us, if we missed a step, failed a test, prayed the wrong words. But the deeper truth is often much gentler and far more powerful. Sometimes God doesn't speak because he's already spoken, and now he's watching to see if we'll walk in what he said. Other times, he's letting us sit with silence because he's growing our capacity to discern his presence beyond noise, beyond signs, beyond emotional affirmation. Trust built in silence is often trust that endures. It's easy to feel secure when every prayer is quickly answered, but real depth comes when you remain rooted, even when heaven feels quiet. In those moments, faith shifts from something you say to something you live. It moves from a concept to a core. This transformation doesn't always come with fireworks or divine epiphanies. Often it's quiet, ordinary, a slow rearranging of your heart, a gentle widening of your perspective, a softening in the places you didn't know had grown calloused. In the silence, your soul learns the rhythm of divine patience. It's where you begin to see that stillness is not the absence of activity, but the presence of refinement. A.W. Tozer wrote, "God's voice is often heard loudest in the quietest places." That line may not feel true when the silence first settles in, but with time, it begins to unfold its meaning. When you stop fighting the stillness and start leaning into it, something changes. Your ears begin to adjust. You notice the subtle stirrings, a memory of a verse that suddenly feels alive. A nudge in your spirit that brings peace you can't explain. A decision to forgive that rises in your heart even when it wasn't on your mind. These are the ways God speaks. Not always with thunder, but often with threads. Not always with lightning bolts, but through whispers woven into the fabric of your daily life. And when you start seeing his silence not as punishment, but as presence, everything shifts. You're no longer waiting for a breakthrough to validate his nearness. You're no longer measuring your faith by how quickly he responds. You begin to walk differently, not because the answers have arrived, but because you've learned to walk with someone, not just toward something. There's a sacred maturity that begins to take shape, not one built on striving or proving, but on surrender, on a quiet, unshakable knowing that God is who he says he is, even when he doesn't say anything at all. This isn't about silencing your longing. It's not about pretending the ache isn't real. It's about learning to let the ache deepen your awareness rather than destroy your hope. There is stillness that starves your soul, and there is stillness that shapes it. When God feels silent, the enemy often whispers lies the loudest, that you're forgotten, that your prayers don't matter, that your story has slipped through heaven's cracks. But none of that is true. And the way to silence those lies is not by chasing new noise, but by anchoring yourself in what never changes. You return to the promises. You stay in the Word, not as a checklist, but as a lifeline. You let your trust speak louder than your doubt, not by suppressing it, but by continuing to walk anyway. Every time you choose to move forward without full clarity, you are building a kind of faith that doesn't collapse under silence. That kind of faith doesn't have to be flamboyant. It can be quiet, grounded, rooted in reverence rather than performance. Sometimes the most profound experiences with God don't happen in the miraculous. They happen in the mundane, in the waiting rooms, in the long nights, in the prayers you repeat, not because they've been answered, but because they've become part of how you breathe. The beauty of walking with God is that He's never rushed. He's not in a hurry to relieve every tension or fix every emotion. Sometimes He lets the silence remain so you can hear yourself more clearly. And in hearing yourself, you come to see what He's been transforming all along. It's not just your circumstances He's changing, it's you. The waiting doesn't always remove the fear, but it reveals the strength within you that fear tried to hide. And sometimes the most healing moments are the ones where you learn how to sit with questions and still choose belief. This is where depth lives. Not in a life free of silence, but in a life that refuses to let silence steal its wonder. Trust doesn't always feel like confidence. Sometimes it looks like quietly refusing to give up, choosing not to resign your heart to numbness, letting grace carry you on days when your faith feels too tired to stand. You don't have to perform strength. You just have to remain open. God doesn't measure your worth by how enthusiastic your worship sounds during the silence. He sees the faith in the pause. He honors the tears no one else sees. He treasures the yes that comes without evidence. And in due time, what once felt hidden will begin to make sense. It may not be what you expected, but it will be what you needed. When the answers do arrive, you'll carry more than just relief. You'll carry wisdom, softness, gratitude, and a deep memory of what it means to be held in the hush. This kind of spiritual shaping doesn't come from always hearing God clearly. It comes from continuing to seek Him when you don't. And that is a kind of strength the world doesn't understand, but heaven does. Silence becomes a teacher when you let it. It reminds you that God is not a performer on your schedule. He is a Father who loves deeply, and sometimes that love means He lets you sit long enough to learn how to hear Him through layers, not just volume. The way through is not always the way you expect. Not every closed door is a rejection. Not every unanswered prayer is a denial. And not every delay means defeat. Some of the most miraculous paths God has ever created didn't look like paths at all, at least not at first. A sea split in two. A barren womb carried a nation. A manger held a king. None of it followed logic. None of it matched expectations. And yet, all of it fulfilled a divine plan that was never supposed to fit inside the limits of human understanding. Shane Claiborne once said, "Sometimes when things are falling apart, they may actually be falling into place." That's the kind of paradox you only understand when you've lived through a season that didn't turn out like you'd hoped, and yet, somehow, you were still led somewhere holy. The hardest part about trusting God's process is that it rarely mirrors your plans. It disrupts your timing. It reroutes your map. It removes the guarantees you built around comfort and safety. But what it gives back is deeper, stronger, realer. And it begins with this simple, life-altering truth. His way is better, not just in theory, but in outcome. Isaiah 55:8 records the voice of God declaring, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." That's not a poetic excuse for unanswered prayers. It's a sacred reminder that heaven's vision is wider than yours. What feels like a roadblock from your perspective may be a redirection from His mercy. Some of the most painful detours you've walked through may have been divine protections in disguise. Not because God wanted you to suffer, but because He saw a cliff up ahead and turned your feet before you fell. Often, it's not disappointment that destroys faith. It's the demand that things go a certain way. Expectations, when held too tightly, can become idols. They wrap themselves in good intentions and rational hopes, but slowly erode your ability to receive what God actually wants to give. When the way forward shifts, when the expected path disappears, that doesn't mean you failed. It means something sacred is being rearranged. Flexibility is often the language of mature faith. Not the kind that wavers with culture, but the kind that yields to divine wisdom. A heart that can say, "I didn't see this coming, but I trust the one who did," is a heart that's not easily shaken. Laura Story once reflected, "Disappointments are just God's way of saying, I've got something better." And that's not a motivational catchphrase. It's a reality forged in the tension between what you asked for and what God knew would actually restore you. No one prays for detours, but many of the most transformative moments in your life will not come from the path you originally chose. They'll come from what you walked through on the way, from what you survived, from what you never saw coming but chose to walk through anyway. If the journey you're on right now feels unfamiliar, that doesn't mean you've wandered off course. It may mean the course is being rewritten, not for your comfort, but for your calling. Often, the clearest signs of progress don't look like momentum. They look like surrender, like letting go of what you assumed would happen, like choosing presence over performance, like planting your feet on new ground and saying, "God, I didn't expect this, but I'm still with you." Releasing control isn't the end of direction. It's the beginning of deeper obedience. The road to peace doesn't always go through predictability. The path to purpose isn't paved with ease. But if God has permitted a shift in your plans, it's not because He's abandoned the promise. He's aligning it more precisely than you know. Each disruption holds within it the potential for deeper trust. Every closed opportunity might be heaven's way of clearing the clutter so you can focus on the one door that matters. This is where faith matures, from the shallow soil of assumption into the rooted ground of surrender, no longer dependent on specific outcomes, no longer anchored to timelines that match your calendar, now grounded in a person, not a process. Learning to let go is not the loss of direction, it's often the path to clarity. Not the kind of clarity that comes with detailed instructions, but the kind that brings inner steadiness. The clarity that says, even without all the answers, I know who walks with me. That steadiness is stronger than a strategy. It holds you when things fall apart. It sustains you when your plans fail. Sometimes you'll find that the unexpected path is the most anointed one, the one God had prepared all along, but you wouldn't have chosen it unless everything else had been stripped away. So don't fear when the road shifts. Don't panic when the plan breaks. Don't assume you failed just because things no longer look like they did in your vision board or your notebook full of dreams. God is not held hostage by your expectations. He is bigger than your timeline, deeper than your desires, and more committed to your growth than you are to your comfort. The detours are not detours to Him, they're design. The sidetracks aren't setbacks in His hands, they're sanctification. And if you allow Him, He'll use every unexpected turn to build in you what no straight road ever could: resilience, humility, perspective, strength, intimacy with Him that no easy journey would have required. No step is wasted when walked in faith. No delay is lost when surrendered to grace. No change of course is outside of His sovereign reach. So much pressure lifts the moment you stop demanding that the path be straight and start asking, what is God forming in me here? That shift from expectation to exploration is where growth happens. That's where hope becomes less fragile and more fierce. Not dependent on what happens next, but grounded in who God has already shown Himself to be. When everything you expected crumbles, what remains is what truly sustains. And often, that's exactly the lesson. You were never meant to place your security in the structure of your plans. The invitation was always to build on something firmer, on someone who doesn't shift with circumstances, but carries you through them. Your foundation doesn't need to change when your path does. Let that free you. The terrain may be unfamiliar, but the guide has never changed. Keep walking, because the path is being built as you step. Not every step will come with confirmation. Some will feel like leaps, others will feel like drags, and often the next place you're meant to be won't appear until you move toward it, uncertain, unfinished, unsure. But movement matters. Obedience in motion is not waiting for a sign, it's becoming one. This is what Scripture means when it says in Psalm 119:105, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." A lamp doesn't flood the whole trail with light. It simply reveals the ground beneath your next step. And somehow, that's enough. Even when the distance is blurred, even when your heart wants a bigger picture, even when nothing around you shouts progress, God gives you enough light for right now. And that is more than sufficient when you're walking with Him. Progress in the kingdom often looks nothing like what the world would call success. The world says bigger, louder, faster. God whispers deeper, steadier, truer. That difference is everything, especially when you're tempted to measure your journey by milestones that others can see, especially when you look at your life and feel behind because nothing dramatic has changed. Forward is not always flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, humble, unseen. Sometimes it's the tenacious decision to stand back up after another silent morning. Sometimes it's the whisper of a prayer you weren't sure you had the strength to pray again. And sometimes it's just choosing to get out of bed and put on your shoes and believe for one more day that this step matters. It does. Because walking by faith means just that, walking, not sprinting, not understanding everything first, just walking. One step, one breath, one moment of trust at a time. Mike Murdoch once said, "The secret of your future is hidden in your daily routine." There's something holy about that simplicity. The transformation you're hoping for won't come through some lightning strike moment that changes everything. It will arrive through a slow accumulation of faithfulness, actions repeated in secret, prayers whispered when no one hears, habits formed when you could have quit. That's what builds your future, not someday, today, right now. This is where the path is being paved, beneath your feet as you take that next step. Hesitation often disguises itself as wisdom. Waiting for the right mood, the right energy, the right sign before moving forward can feel responsible, but sometimes it's just fear dressed in planning. At a certain point, the next act of faith isn't waiting, it's walking. Even if it's trembling, even if it's small, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone around you, obedience doesn't require applause. It requires conviction. And the kind of conviction that endures is the kind that knows this path may be lonely, may be quiet, may be nothing like you expected. But it's where God is building something in you that matters far more than results. Resilience. This journey is not about crossing a finish line quickly. It's about becoming someone along the way. The pressure to arrive fades when you realize the destination is not the goal. The transformation is. Each ordinary decision to stay the course is a declaration of hope. Every small act of integrity, every moment you choose peace instead of panic, is another brick in the foundation of the life you're called to live. Peter Marshall once said, "Small deeds done are better than great deeds planned." That's never been more true than in seasons where you feel like your efforts are invisible. When the seeds you've planted haven't yet broken through the soil. When the prayers you've spoken haven't yet echoed back with answers. The temptation in those seasons is to stop, to wait for proof before continuing, to look for signs before choosing to believe. But trust never demands proof first. It just walks. It keeps moving when the answers haven't arrived. It keeps showing up even when the finish line feels distant. It keeps building even when the blueprints keep changing. And that's what God honors, not perfection, but persistence. Not performance, but presence. Not instant success, but the kind of steady faith that keeps showing up anyway. The enemy doesn't fear a loud moment of faith nearly as much as he fears quiet, consistent obedience, because that's what builds momentum in the kingdom. That's what shakes foundations. Not just people who believe in God, but people who act like He's already moving, even when they can't see it yet. What if the next breakthrough isn't waiting at the top of the hill, but in the step you're afraid to take right now? What if clarity won't come while you sit still, but will be revealed as you go? In Exodus, when the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, they weren't told to wait for the waters to part before walking. They had to move. They had to step forward, and as they did, the path opened. It was obedience first, miracle second. That pattern still holds. Some of your biggest revelations will arrive not through waiting for a sign, but through trusting enough to move without one. Don't wait until you feel strong. Don't wait until the doubt disappears. Don't wait until your circumstances look ideal. Start with what you have, where you are, with the strength that's available right now. The path isn't hidden, it's unfolding, and it unfolds as you walk. What happens when you take one more faithful step is this. Your heart starts to believe again. Your eyes begin to see more clearly. Your posture shifts from survival to purpose, because movement fuels momentum. Momentum restores focus, and focus leads you back to peace. You weren't meant to stay in survival mode forever. The wilderness is real, but so is the promise on the other side. And sometimes the only way through it is through it. Each day, you get to choose whether this is another day of stalling or a day of stepping. Heaven isn't looking for flawless execution. Heaven is waiting for faithful continuation, not dramatic moves, consistent ones, not perfect plans, present trust. Even the smallest step in God's direction is never wasted. He sees the way you've continued even when everything in you wanted to stop. He honors the steps you've taken that no one claps for. He's keeping record of the movement that looked insignificant on the outside, but cost you everything on the inside. None of it goes unseen. Each one is a seed, and seeds don't shout. They grow silently. Roots go down long before anything breaks the surface. The work beneath is just as holy as the fruit above. Don't abandon the process just because results aren't instant. Steady faith will always outlast situational doubt. If all you can do today is take a breath, say a prayer, and make one small decision that moves you forward, then do that. If all you have is the strength to whisper, "I trust you, Lord," then begin there. The path doesn't need to look finished. It only needs your next step. And that next step could look like writing the thing you've been putting off, calling the person you've avoided for months, returning to the Word even when you feel disconnected, or showing up to work with a different attitude. Each of these decisions, small as they seem, builds the ground under your feet. Not every journey will be understood by those around you, and not every season will come with validation. But the one who called you, he hasn't changed. The path may feel uncertain, the timeline may stretch longer than you expected, but the promise still stands. God is not late. He is not absent. He sees how long you've been carrying questions with no answers. He knows the weight of the things you haven't spoken aloud, and he's still guiding through fog, through silence, through detours, through every fragile yes you've whispered when no one was watching. The way may not look like you imagined, but it's being made under your feet, one step at a time. And grace has never once failed to carry those who keep walking.